Good morning. It is the seventh Sunday of Ordinary Time, and if you're anything like me, you're sort of very aware that Lent is around the corner. Um, I'm eating a lot of candy. I just made spaghetti sauce with sausage. Um, I don't eat that much meat. Not a vegetarian, but anyway. But Lent, yeah, it's just I'm really looking forward to it. Even though, of course, it's a challenge. It's a beautiful time. But anyway, we're not quite there yet. And I just wanted to say I'm going to post a link to this. I talked about this book last time. Wonderful book. If you Question 7 by Richard Flanagan. I'll just post a link. I wrote a piece about it. But a recent book and highly recommended. So I wanted to talk about, there's this great, this is going to be my theme. And as always, I'm just kind of like winging it, I'm just kind of speaking extemporaneously. I mean, I think before I do one of these about, in a general way, what I want to say, but yeah, I'm not reading from a teleprompter, so excuse me, it's always, a surprise to me, sort of, too. But here's the quote from Flannery O'Connor that I absolutely love. And it is, "The operation of the church is entirely set up for the sake of the sinner, which creates much misunderstanding among the smug." And the church is just endlessly fascinating. Christ, the Gospels, because on the one hand, and I feel so lucky that when I came into the church, I was not burdened with any of the baggage that so many people are, of having been inculcated apparently with this horrible idea of a punishing God, and you make one false move and you're going to be tormented for eternity and thrown into hell. And I just didn't, I don't know how anyone who has ever read the Gospels could think such a thing, but I guess if you're indoctrinated with that as a child, you don't bother. It's that, anyway, it's horrible, of course, horrible. That message, I didn't have it, and of course I had heard it, but I did read the Gospels, and to me, Christ was something entirely different. I mean, not, as he says, "I came not to call the righteous, but sinners." And healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I mean, that's what I really responded to. Because though I didn't have the baggage of the punishing God, I definitely had, I had sins, for sure. I knew they were sins. To be a Catholic, to know what sin is. And a lot of them were sexual sins, as it so happens, or things around my emotional, romantic life, I guess you could say. So, the problem is if you get too far away from the idea from the central notion that the church is set up for the sinner, and the going back to the fall, then what you get is, basically Protestantism or a version of it, or what's in a way worse, Catholicism, so-called, or something masquerading to me as Catholicism, that is stripped of all notion of sort of the fact that, listen, we're not here because we're such good people and we just want to help the poor. I am a massive. If you think, if that's your stance, like, to me, you have not nearly examined your conscience closely enough. And I'm just talking about the daily. Just take a look at your mind. I can't believe I'm that different than anyone else, but just the judgments and the black heart and the jealousy and the you disrespected me and therefore I'm going to cast you out, the desire for vengeance. And of course, we're sort of civilized people, so it comes out in ways that are, more subtle than walking around with a knife in your hand that you're going to stab someone. But it's all there, the black heart. And so anyway, but what prompted this was I started to read this book. I'm not even going to say what the name or the author is, no need to, but it's a book that purports to be about, I'm reading a lot of books about monasticism and in particular about Benedict and the rule of Saint Benedict and so forth. So this was a book that I found in a bookstore, got off eBay actually. But here's a sentence that probably when I started out, before I came into the church, and probably for many years after, it was like, so I was just kind of drinking everything in. My powers of discrimination were not that finely tuned, and maybe I'm sure they still have a long way to go, but so these are two sentences that I knew, and they're in the introduction to this book, and right away I knew, oh, here we go. Like, this is not a book I'm going to want to read because it's going to be boring. And here's a sentence. I write as a self-identified Christian, though one burned out, parentheses, like a lot of people, on a shallow religion. I've found more life, risk, and daring in the church's ancient traditions of prayer than in what's available in most contemporary spiritualities. So what that means is there's no crucified Christ. There's no guaranteed Thomas Merton is going to be mentioned in the next sentence, which he is. And there's also going to be no consideration at all of sin in general, but especially sexual sin. This is what I found. And the thing is, the point is not like, oh, Catholics think sex is bad. No, the thing is, if you are, to me, just in touch with the crucified, the sacred heart, the bleeding heart of Christ, and if you have examined your conscience to the extent that you have looked at your actions, let's say around sex, around anything, but say around sex, and taken the effect of your actions out to their logical farthest conclusion, you have to see, if you're not in consonance with the church's, as it so happens, teachings on marriage and the family, which are totally based on love, the deepest kind of self-sacrificing, self-giving love for all men, women, and children, you will see, if you're outside the teachings, that your actions are harming people. They're not there, and that always falls on women and children most heavily, by the way. And the point is right. So to me, the closer I get to the heart of Christ, the more it's like, to be faithful to the church's teachings on marriage and the family is not this horrible deprivation. It's a joy. It's a way of self-giving. It's a way, has been a way for me of healing. So if you skip that part or sideline it, or just think, as we hear so often, like, oh, Jesus doesn't care about our sexual sins. It's like, no, he totally does, as much as any other. And in a way, I do think, just because that goes so to the heart and of our souls and our spirits and the essence of who we are. I think sexual sins permeate every area of our existence in a way. I don't know. That is very heavy. So to me, if you skip all that, it's not like, oh, you're wrong and all the wonderful things you do don't mean anything. It's that you are missing something. You're missing something yourself, and therefore um, I don't totally want to sort of follow you, or I can't quite totally hear you because I feel like you're missing the point. And Thomas Merton, okay, so God bless him, and I am I mean, he's just so prolific. I have read probably one 200th of what he's written, but I came into the church, I read The Seeds of Contemplation, of course, and that was very attractive to me, and but as I read him more, what I saw over time is to me, or what I've read of his, he rarely mentions Christ. He doesn't mention the crucified Christ. He doesn't talk much about the Eucharist. Like to me, the center, so it's all this very sort of interesting, it's kind of monasticism, as this book turns out to be about, that I did not read, that I set aside, but sort of monasticism as an aesthetic kind of, there are always the people who write these books have like found some monastery, and they have like a little badge of honor, and they're like very close to the monks there, and it's like this kind of spiritual elite thing. And it's like, oh please, big deal to me anyway. I mean, in and of itself, that's great, but how have you really changed your life? Let me see, what is your heart like bleeding for? And Thomas Merton, the thing I absolutely that stuck, I just can't get over, sort of. And this is, believe me, I know my own wounds are very much in here. But it's the whole thing where he had the kind of affair with the nurse, and whether or not it was physically consummated, I don't know. No one seems to quite, whatever. But it's clearly that he was way outside the bounds of his vows. There was an emotional, some kind of physical contact, and a emotional promiscuity or attachment that would have been way outside his monastic vows. And so we fail. But interestingly, he seemed to have zero remorse about, first of all, the fact that he had basically just totally used her, and then thought about it and was like, oh, I'm going to stay a monk. And what did that do to her? There was absolutely no, from what I could see, sort of cognizance of her as truly as a human being. But also that he had no compunction about, he completely violated his vows. And again, like to me, it's like, okay, of course we're all sinners, but I would have become, first of all, it's like, come on, if if he had become totally pathologically obsessed with her, for example, and then suffered the tortures of the damned, like that I could have totally understood and related to, and then repented bitterly of his transgression, and then did penance for what the harm that he did for her, and then he just totally skated over it. And to me, that is a sign. That's what I'm talking about. It's this kind of, quote, Catholic spirituality that is shorn of all, a true grounding in the wounded, in the crucified Christ who has died for all of this, died so we could be reconciled. So it's talk about shallow. This guy says, I write as a self-identified Christian, though one burned out on shallow religion. It's hello, what, and also it's so condescending, the people who are faithfully going to confession and just doing the basic availing themselves of the sacrament, like reverence for the Eucharist, sitting before the tabernacle and prayer, like that's shallow. And like those people also don't notice and haven't evaluated clearly all the sort of, erroneous strands and factions and all the stuff that is done in the name of the church and under the name of Christ that is shallow. But the response is, if you're like repulsed by shallow religion, then maybe practice one that is kind of not shallow, not add to it. So, and then these people they write about landscape, and there's usually some like terrible thing that's happened that is actually a universal thing, like someone died, the wife dies, the mother dies, or whatever, which is horrible. It's a universal terrible sorrow, but it's never I came to terms with the some horrible thing I had done to someone else, maybe even unbeknownst to me, or I came to the realization, or maybe I came to the realization that I'm like a total alcoholic, and that the really righteous thing to do would be to get sober anyway. Yeah, I just think and that's not, please, Thomas Merton, obviously incredible. I mean, the breadth of his knowledge and learning. I can touch the hem of his garment, obviously, in many, many ways. But to me, he is not a hero of mine. And I'm not, and I don't know. I don't. As you go farther, as you go along farther on your own path, maybe it's just you see what your own experience responds to, and because of that whole, I just don't really trust his kind of notion of contemplation if it didn't bring him deep enough to understand and know what he was really doing in that little frolic of his own. Again, it's not like that's the worst sin in the world, but that you would have so little cognizance of the seriousness to your own spiritual life and your life of faith, and the harm you were doing to the other is the point. Not that we want, and the thing is, no one, of course we don't want to live in guilt and constant scrupulous, no, but my experience has been, it's why I even do these videos or write all the stuff that I write and think, it's because to me the closer you get to the heart of the crucified and of course risen Christ, the more freedom, the more joy, the more you can laugh at yourself. But it's because I just think if you're firmly grounded, the more firmly grounded we are in the way, the truth, and the life, yet there's a huge, like, gushing, life-giving joy and sense of humor and lightness, while also being the most serious, the deepest, the most profound, ineffable mysteries that in existence. But of course I can't go without reading a line from Father Donald Haggerty, who, as you know, has been a great help to me. But the thing, one last thing. The other thing that kind of, to me, whatever you want to call it, misplaced, not quite whole, it's like a Catholicism that hasn't like consummated its love with Christ in a way, to carry out the sort of sexual, if you like, erotic paradigm, is that right? Then you get the people who, the invitations, like people who will just random people, not Catholic, come into the church and they're, they think it's like, oh, so the church, oh, you should just welcome everyone. So I'm going to take the Eucharist because, of course, Jesus would welcome me, like that. And it's like, ooh, like it's such a totally, totally not getting it. Of course the church welcomes everyone. And here's what we welcome you to, take up your cross and learn, have the respect and the reverence to learn about what you are eating, what is being offered to you, the gift, and because you want to be in the proper shape to receive it. But anyway, Father Haggerty is talking about kind of this, the almost universal reception of Holy Communion at weekend masses raises precisely a question of real belief in the truth of the Eucharist. I mean, he's like hardcore. He's like, oh, all these people are taking the Eucharist without having, basically. Well, he's talking about mortal sin, and for sure that is not, you really, really, really want to be going to confession before. But anyway, he says the likely prevalence of sacrilegious communion with perhaps no comparable precedent in history, because we so don't like to or are not in the habit of examining our consciences. Very thing I'm talking about. The likely prevalence of sacrilegious communion with perhaps no comparable precedent in history surely contributes in turn to a slow bleeding within the body of the church during the current era. So there it is. Again, contributing, when we fall short, we contribute to the bleeding of the mystical body and the heart of Christ. So it is, these are vital questions, and that we all get to continue to ask ourselves. Anyway, that's my thing for today. Flannery O'Connor. The operation of the church is entirely set up for the sake of the sinner, which creates much misunderstanding among the smug. So, and let me beg my Lord and Redeemer to remove the temptation or the horrible sin of my own smugness. So anyway, thank you so much for listening, and wishing you a beautiful week.